Welcome to Kalamazoo Air Museum. I have Dan. He wants to speak on airplane restoration of some antique beauties. If you would, sir.
Good morning. At the moment we have two aircraft in our restoration facility. What you just saw there is our FM2 Wildcat built by Gruman. We also, in the other adjacent work bay here, we have a Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bomber. These are both aircraft still owned by the Navy. Both airplanes were built late 30s, 1940, and both were involved in a training program conducted on the Great Lakes, Lake Michigan to be specific, during World War II, wherein new Navy pilots were actually trained to land on aircraft carriers. These were done on kind of pseudo aircraft carriers that were created because our actual line carriers were at the time in the South Pacific fighting the Japanese. Of course, in that process it certainly involved some accidents. Both these airplanes ended up in the water due to those kind of accidents. In both cases, the pilots were recovered unharmed. In the case of the FM2 here, it sat on the bottom of Lake Michigan for 68 years before it was finally recovered in 2009. The Dauntless was recovered in 2013 after 65 years in the water. I can tell you this airplane was taking off from one of these pseudo carriers, the USS Sable, going down the deck during takeoff, and his engine simply seized, catastrophically seized. The simple story is he was going too fast to stop before he reached the bow. At the same time, he wasn't going quite fast enough to fly. So he simply went right off the bow, splashed into the water, fairly benignly. Pilot, like I say, managed to escape. Well, in the meantime, the carrier was still moving along at about 15 knots. And he went down right in front of the boat, and the carrier ended up hitting the airplane right behind the cockpit and literally cut it in half. Wow. So a lot of what you see in front of you is the efforts to reattach the tail part of the airplane to the forward fuselage. This is quite a drawn-out process. You can see the round steel fixture that the airplane is mounted in. We affectionately call the rotisserie. It's basically an alignment feature, or an alignment structure to keep everything straight, and it also allows us to literally roll the airplane over when it comes time to work in the fuselage. Inside the cockpit, for instance, we'll be able to simply stand on the floor, simply roll the cockpit over to us and work on it. The rotisserie was a brainchild of one of our volunteers who actually designed it, and we had it built, and it's proved invaluable so far.
Sweet.
It's also capable of handling several other small or similar size airplanes. When this one's done, we can use it for others as well. One of the most difficult parts of putting this particular airplane back together, you actually can see up here right in the dorsal of right in forward of the fin, with the clamps on it. It's simply a sheet metal structure, but it's all compound curves. Back in 1939 or 40, when the airplane was built, this was a part that was simply stamped out of a large press, very simply and easily. Nowadays, none of those patterns or dies are available, so we're literally having to figure out how to do this. And the piece that's up there now is not the first attempt. I believe it's the second or third attempt to make the part. Coming along very well now. But very often, every day, of the things that we do in here involve a learning process. We do have volunteers who are retired A&P mechanics, retired millwrights, machinists, welders, you name it. But for all of those guys, we also have volunteers who come from other non-manufacturing kind of jobs, like maybe teachers or electricians. That's trade. I'm a retired photographer. We have one gentleman who delivered bread for most of his working career. So for us, it's quite a learning experience every day. On the other side of the bay here are the wings for the same airplane. The wings actually had a little damage only to the left wing tip. Needed to be repaired. Against the back wall you can see the new rudder. When this airplane came out of the water, it had no rudders, no elevators, and we are in the process of building both from scratch. Let's see. I think what you're looking at here is the engine. Yes, this is the original reduction gearing section, or the propeller reduction gearing. What you see here that looks like graham crackers is basically trying to think. Can't think of the metal. Can't think of the metal. Anyway, that's due to the time in the water. This here is the new, same structure. This actually came from a donor engine. A gentleman out in Arizona gave to us, and we were able to do it. Here's a piece of the original engine, which is this right here on this one.
Completely corroded.
Yep. Magnesium. I'm sorry.
Magnesium.
That's right. This is magnesium. If you remember your high school chemistry, you'll remember that magnesium and water don't like each other. And of course, after 68 years in the water, it really showed that.
Can we go over there?
Sure.
To the dive bomber. Is this SBD-2?
This is an SBD-2 Dauntless.
So 2 Dauntless. You got a Dauntless 3.
Pardon? I'll have to come back.
Thank you.
This is an SBD-2 Dauntless. It's actually a -2P. P for photographic. Yeah, this airplane was actually a reconnaissance airplane version. The Navy converted 14 of the -2s into reconnaissance versions. You can see a hole right under that open hatch on the side of the fuselage.
Okay.
See it on the bottom there?
Yes.
Inside of that hatch was a large aerial camera that was mounted, that pointed straight down through there, through that hole in the bottom. This was a field modification done in San Diego. And so we actually had some reconnaissance airplanes flying in those days.
Did it?
Very early in the war.
Still a dive bomber?
Still the dive bomber, yes.
Still the holes in the flaps?
These are the wings. The flaps, because it was a dive bomber, let's take a look at this picture down here.
Oh, I did see that earlier.
This is a painting of an SBD in action, diving almost straight down on its target. And you can see the landing flaps and the dive flaps all open. The holes help control the airflow through it, and it controls the speed of the airplane so it doesn't overextend, if you will, fly beyond its capabilities to hold itself together.
John and Kevin explained to me, without the holes in the flaps and the flaps open up,
right,
then it would divert the air away from the back wing and then they couldn't steer it, so
Right.
they had to put the holes in the wings.
Well, there's the danger of the airplane flying, accelerating to the point that it exceeds its structural capabilities
Okay.
and actually ripping the wings off.
Oh,
So we don't want that. So it's all about controlling the speed.
sweet.
Now this airplane was also in training in Lake Michigan, training fellas to land on aircraft carrier. This particular airplane, this pilot was making an approach to the back of the same carrier, the USS Sable, to land. And so he was a mile and a half behind the ship, maybe a couple hundred feet in the air, just below stall speed, landing gear, flaps, hook, all hanging down, canopy open, ready to come aboard. It was February 18th, 1944, so you can imagine how cold it was in the lake. And once again, his engine failed. Well, when your engine quits and you're only a couple hundred feet off the water and dead slow, you're only going one place, and you're going pretty quick. And he had only seconds to prepare to ditch the airplane in the water. Because the landing gear was down, the pilot fully realized that as soon as the gear touched the water, it would probably flip the airplane.
Wow.
And he didn't have time to retract the gear because it took 10 seconds to retract the gear. So it appears that when he came right down to the surface of the water, he literally just pulled the nose up as hard as he could and stalled the airplane and just plopped into the water, about as gently as he could. And we know that because when we took the horizontal stabilizers off the airplane, the skin